Hello everyone, it's General AI, Canadian confirmation lines and ground centers line condition setting to modification screen lines, adaptations and measure, scale, and balance. This is about understanding how to map your sequence and understand how to use the coordinates. Getting lines of communication system is all about travel. Right? Travel is the mechanism lines of force that puts everything in position lines together. And travel is its communication system, how we use our echoes and our Zulers, how we use our formation lines and our grounds into modification or runways, how to use that through Tango Foxtrot. Location setting to all levels. Line communication interference of Romeo, line communication Galaxy, Syria, or Oscar November. Direct lines of modification is to understand how the connections comes from the avatars. Now, the avatar lines its sequence, line communication interference, sets coordinates line, communication lines of pi, sets line northwest, south, and east. Now, the coordinates of communication setting know exactly how it changes lines of interactions. It's lines of communication system of surface. All right, so you guys have your test today, and it's all based on what you already know in that track location to its settings. But it's a ground center that comes all communications to your remembering cycles, your psychological system, your psychosocial system, your Riemann point lines of directions, high correlation sending track communication system and travel. Understand how to use that in all lines in longitude and latitude and your bandwidths of streaming. Okay, everybody has a link. They understand the formation lines of fortitude and screen lines adaptation of surface and how to use it through data files. Process calculation lines of 1 setting, process lines of 2 setting, process lines of 3 settings and track location to a system. Okay, data, right? Files, communication, and ground lines, you have an umbrella that sets its position lines of travel. Okay, there's the umbrella, right? Direct signals, modification lines of 1 and track location lines of 2, right? Process lines, open signal, open panel, on line rotations to projection of screen lines adaptation. Process calculation line, ground center high interference, puts data files in 1 tractions, 1 point system, cross-line signals to another point system, to another point line track location. Directing signals modification lines, XT1000 comes into 4 platforms. You're always going to see XT1000s in geometrical lines of screens adaptations that you get instructed lines of schematics, okay? Because they make sure that you are basically knowing exactly what's going on in your coordinates in seconds over minutes, minutes over pi, and hours over frame and track location setting of travel. So that's calculation lines of ground centers in line condition setting to a half byte that sets position lines of travels. Now it has direct line signals and a triangulation split lines of anomaly and rotation surface and track location. Direct calculation lines, ground center high interference sets the data position lines of processing, line condition setting to 1 XT1000s on data ports. Direct signals into modification lines of consoles and line cross line signals into point lines of graph communications. Direct lines of signals, XT1000 comes into modification lines, ground centers line, loop the system and travel. Points lines of graph, sets calculates lines of center of operation surface and track location of schematics to pi. Now that's just one data sheet. And it's all connected to high generation lines, screen lines, adaptations, and center core calculation lines of schematics of primers, and line calculation setting to your clouds. All on your clouds, guys. Everything's in your clouds that you see in trashes. All right, so the formation lines of coordinates, remember in this line rotation of the cycle? Okay. So you're always going to see XT1000s of plateau in formation lines. Okay, they're not stars, guys. They're XT1000s on standby. Let's go through process lines and direct signals. Let's get to 45,000 line signals into parameters, lines, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Core track lines, calculation setting, and schematics over screen, right? XT1001, XT1006, XT1027. Process calculation lines, XT1001, XT1000 over cross location of system. Process lines, XT30,000. Set correlation lines, XT mothership and track location. Okay? Now, what you understand, there's an XT1000 inside the motherships. Now, the mothership core tracks center locates to its energetic dome. This stats communicates to its system. It opens all track lines in a 3-line cycle and line rotations of centers. The routes of the router is in line rotation surface and track location. Direct the lines of modification lines, console core centers into platforms of communication lines of grounds of docking. Docking line signals line conditions of 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 operation lines of surface track calculations. That's my equation, right? All right. And again, this is all done through your calculation screen lines adaptations of your cloud and your clocking system. Okay? Okay. Modifiers and line screen adaptation lines like core track interference is where we put position location to its system. Track calculation lines, ground center lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Equals lines of core track interference of 3 cycles. Okay, direct signals. Set core track interference in position on triangulation, and position lines of box and setting. Box line calculation lines of flux in 3 line cycles. Sets position lines of downshift, cross lines of satellites and traction. Direct lines, console line, console 2, console 3, console 4, hanger 1, and hanger 2 in track location. Direct lines, modification lines, ground center interference of data formation lines of 1, data position lines of 2, data position lines of 3, data position lines of 4, and data position lines of 5, and set correlation. Setting communication lines of direct location of line signal locations and setting lines of 0, 3s, and set position. Console calculation lines of navigation, sets calculation lines of 8 on standby and track location. Direct signal line consists of 3 over line, 1 lines of 1 graph and communication setting to travel. Points lines of graph and communicates to its system. Data formation lines of 1, data formation lines of 3, data formation lines of 8, and data formation lines of 24,000 traction. Directing signals into modification lines at high core centers of XT1000 set plat division location setting to travel. That puts lines that communicates in system all through docking settings. That my equation. See, very complicated stuff. And this is all done through a holographic sheet and a graph screen lines adaptations a high track location. Okay, very complicated stuff, right? So we all have to pay attention now to all lines of how to get in your coordinates and lines of your mapping sequence and travels and direct signals and modification. Okay, all right, so everything is an inside line. Nothing's an outside correlation. You have to be very cautious in that. So it's staying within the lines, and that's what the moon does. The moon sets the course, the sun sets the division, and location lines the screen. Okay, opens all signals, and a pi generation lines of 3 split lines of anomaly. Sets core track lines of 2 and 6 and 8 lines of panels. Process calculate these lines into flux over line over screen. Direct signals, cross line signal, location lines over screen. Direct line signal locations and process line signal. That puts all lines of communication system and process calculations in the direction. Very complicated stuff, right? All right, so the center communication lines across line signals. That's across the line position. Cross line center is center operation lines of surface and track calculation lines of platform. Directed signals and modification lines of ground centers. Output signals into a flux over 3 line cycles and 3 centers. Sets communication line direct signals and communication lines of pi. Sets track calculation lines of high center interference. There's the intelligence and set calculation lines and screen. That my equation. Okay, very powerful stuff. Center core track centers, 3 lines of communication lines, direct signals. Security lines of panels, 1 setting, 1 center, 1 operation surface and traction. Directing laser lines, panel core track interference, cross line signals, laser 1, 2, 6, 8, and 12 set correlations. Travel point lines of graph, cross line signals, line condition setting, the Skynet line screen, adaptation lines of surface, track calculus modify that puts all communications setting and all lines of travels into mechanism lines of position. That my equation. All right. Laser traction, solar graph, screen lines, adaptation. Let's go through blue line screen, center core system and travel. Point lines of setting, point lines of system, and zero gravity. Sets calculation lines, ground center line, conditional lulls. Cloak and dagger and line centers and center system locates to a system and travel. Sets calculation modifications comes out through equation. That my equation. All right. Laser attractions and direct signals into modification lines of truth line. Puts all communication lines of force line. Let's get in kinetic centers and box frame and line condition study. 1 signature lines going through line loop and line signals and open sequence lines of communication. Data formation lines of data. Sets lines into window frame and box frame and triangulation. Process calculation lines into plasma screen, adaptation lines surface, plasma screens and direct signals into lacing lines of core track sending calculation lines of its mapping. Direct line signals, modification lines of 1, cross lines is 2 line signals and line position. Process line signal and line conditions, cross line signals and line communication to that position location of its program. Direct signals, modification lines of data formation lines of 1 and position of 2. In position of 3 and track location. Okay. Now directing lines of high center interference, XT1000 comes in and out through frame. It's really interesting in travel. Comes in position and out through frame. See it? See it coming in and out through the plasma wall. Directed signals, cross line signals out through equation, teleports in the screen lines of data port screen setting. Process calculation lines that generate the screen lines adaptation lines of centers. Sets communication lines, disappears in traction indirect signals into modification lines of TV formation with screen lines adaptation. Process calculates along one cycle, sets communication lines across referencing. Blue cycles, line correlates the lines of schematics over screen, direct signals and modification, lace and line calculation, screen line adaptation, process lines into plasma screen lines adaptation, process lines of mapping sequence, coordinate communication lines infinity, over cross line inside position of travel, sets communication lines of ground center line to its country in calculation. All right. Directing signals and modification lines, we have a monitoring system and a TV reception line and a box frame position lines of gravel. Gravel line rotations, one position, all levels of point lines of tracks and direct signals into modification lines. X marks the spot. Calculation modification line crosses line signals in position of process of communication. Process line direct signals comes in line signals, line conditions over cross line condition setting position of its program. Direct signals, modification line centers, line position of the time loop. Three patterns, lines of data, and process calculation. Done by equation, right? The center communication line is a direct line signal that we get in position of ground centers. So the ground centers let's calculation modify. Let's go through ground center lines of 1, ground center lines of 2, and ground center lines of 3, and position lines of travels in Merkaba, tesseract, and tetrahedron in calculation. Directing signals and modification lines, ground centers of 1, ground centers of 2, and track location. Travel position of point lines of graph, over line signals, over lines of patterns, and line position of its roots in calculation. Directing signals and modification. Down through equation comes out through calculation. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Mapping sequence coordinates an inter-center course setting in line condition setting to a mapping sequence comes in traction. Directing signals into center line and operation surface and track calculation lines of balance. Directing signals into modification ground centers. Data formation over cross line signals, over line rotation surface and cross line conditions across referencing, and 3 set correlations line communication lines of travel. Direct lines of modification lines of signals and position lines in calculation. Cubing screen lines adaptation, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 3, and track location. Directing symbolism line condition setting, cross lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 of sonars, echo line screen adaptations into echo-Zuller, information screen lines adaptation as center communication. Done by equation. All right. Directing lines of symbolism, line cross line calculus, and sending is cubical line screen is a direct signal location of data files. Process lines of point lines of graphs, sending communication lines of direct signals. Now we formulate the screen lines. Okay, set calculus lines. Symbolism lines on 1, 2, and 3, and 4 line cycles. That's the indication setting, right? Process calculus in the graph lines, and 3 lines of 4 track location. That's one data file, right? Process lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings and travel. Okay. Direct signal lines of 3 over 4 and center course system and platforms of communication. Directing signals modification lines indicate lines and flux over correlation line screen adaptations of flux. Correlates the track interference of platforms 1, 2, 3 lines of inhibitors over screen adaptation lines of surface. Process lines of 1 table, 1 tablet, and travel and communication. Direct data line files, cross line signals into 3 line division and 4 cycles. Sets communication lines of direct signals, a crossing line reference, and track location. Done by equation. Symbolism lines of patterns and line conditions of pi generates the screen lines of overline signals that puts all levels of graph communication screen lines and routes the router's line condition setting of a solar sail and track location to its division. Done by equation. All right. The center course system is all levels of travel. The mechanism line calculation lines is a collagen line communication high interference of patterns. Position lines of graph. Okay, this is a mapping sequence location of coordinates and travel point lines of communications. See the intelligence, see the nose. There's the mouth, there's the chin, right? But look over here. Set lines of split lines of communication setting, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, and track location. See? Center calculation lines, off calculation. See? 2 line signals, right? Process lines of 1, process lines of 2, right? Pretty powerful stuff from all intelligent information screens. All right, so directing lines of panels and XT1000 adds a data formation line screen, 2 track location of division across line signals, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. Communication lines of ground center interference to ground centers, opens all signals, opens all line signal, line rotation surface, and data formation lines into 3 track location of division. Travel point lines of graph, over lines of data, process lines over track locations, overhead, direct signals into defaults, line screen lines adaptation to 3 files and track calculations. Done by equation. All right, so data formation line screens comes in all calculation modified through line condition setting to patterns. It processes line communication setting. Data formation lines of 1, 2, and 3 travels and direct signals. Process ground centers, line conditions 1, 2, and 3 travels and direct signal. Modification centers, line, ground center, line, and rotation surface. 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 platform, 1 communication, 1 center, 1 operations calculation. Done by equation. Setting communication lines of direct signals is all lines high center interference. Process calculation lines high center location setting the formula location to its equation. Directing signals, line condition lines of dx lines of 1. Sets lines equals lines of 2, and line settings of 3 in position of 4 track locations. Division lines, data formation lines of cycle, right? Process lines, signal lines, high center interference into 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, over line correlation set interactions. Directed signals, modification lines of data formation lines of data, calculation lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings of travel. Points lines of graph, communication lines of ground centers, Fibonacci line screen, direct signals, modification cycles, modification system, platforms of 3, platforms of 2, platforms of 1, and platforms of 4, and line rotation, surface, and traction. Done by equation. All right. So I'm just showing you the coordinates, how to get through files, and how it lines its signals. Let's go through point graphs, screen lines, and charterways. Okay, so remember the calculation setting to buoys, and position lines of buoys, lines of the water containment screen. There's a buoy there, right? Signifying line calculation lines to high center interference and position location of ship, right? And track set locations. So we have buoy lines and perimeter lines of parameters and line rotation cycles, or track line calculations and high direct signal locations of setting, sets communication lines to submarine and track location. Directing signals, modification lines of water containment screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Okay, everything is a mapping sequence. Okay, now we understand the coordinates of data. Process line calculation, screen lines adaptation. Let's go through flux line screens. Direct lines of plasma, calculate and modify. Direct signals of 1, platforms of 2, platforms of 4, and track location. Direct signals, modification on the ground centers, line condition setting. Open all signals, modificate platforms of setting of center core system of travel. Center core centers of XT1000, platitude lines of 4 settings in position location of waiting cycles and tractions. 4 communication lines, cross line signals, signal line of rotation surface, and box frame communication of plasma. Direct signals, modification of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, high calculation lines at high center interference. Direct calculation lines, cross line signals, 1 center, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division. Okay? Process calculation lines, cross line center, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 clocking. Direct signal locations at ground centers, 2 traction, line division, location, line conditions of 0 gravity. Sets communication lines of platform, magnetic, highway, and travel line rotation, surface location, setting, and travel communication to position of program. Done by equation. Processing position lines of travel gets all lines of communications how you formulate. Directing signal location to its point lines of settings. Graph communication lines of 1, graph communication lines of 2, 3, and 6, and 8 in travel. All in direct signals. So we go through 8 lines of flux. Okay, the flux line screen opens all signals. All right, so that's altitude screen lines into aerodynamics. Line conditions of 1 graph, correlation lines of 2 settings of travel. Set communication lines of ground centers. Operate the server location setting of the towers and line communication to the system. Process calculation of ground centers into Schumann resonance. Ground centers lines of 1 track line division and location to a system. Okay, set core centers, line conditions setting, all levels of Asgard and travel. Done by equation. All right, Asgard. Boom, right there. If you look really close, you can see lines of communication setting of unison space. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, guys. Directing signals is a modification lines of grounds. It gets all communication setting and processing line setting. Now the ground center line position opens all signals. Let's go through satellites in 1, 2 track line provision lines and F line screen. Direct calculation lines of high center interference, panels, solar line direct signals into platforms in communication setting and process cross line signals and travel. Direct signals into 1 line signal into time stamping, timeline rotation, surface, and track locations. Platforms indicate line centers in 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 calculation, modification line screen. Done. All right, calculation modify, line direct signals, back and location system of Asgard. Core track interference platforms 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Sets position 1, 2, 3 lines of high center 4, line setting, correlated lines of location grid and travel. Direct signals, modification lines of aerodynamics, 1 signal, 1 triangulate line position on molecules. Calculated lines of the mine and line condition setting, atmosphere line screen, Tango Fox. Core track interference into Kilo Mike, Romeo, Foxtrot, lines of 3 setting, core track lines of division. Calculate lines, high center interference, XT1000 comes in a 3-line panel and rotation surface and tractions. Direct signals, modificate line cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, line condition, XT1000 traction. Done by equation. The modification line screen direct signal has a line calculation setting the ground centers of one center, one surface. Process calculation of ground centers opens all signals and platforms and track locations to its constellation path. It opens all dimensional door screens and direct signals and modification. Done by equation. Very powerful stuff, all through Asgard. All right, directing symbolism. Now that position lines of track lines of data files. Process communication lines of highest interference. Let's go through 24,000 line signals, 3 zeros in tractions and direct signals into 48 equals lines of 1, X lines of D, F line equals line into factor. Okay, setting track lines into 72 panels. Okay, so that's 4 waving cycles, 4 track division lines of 2, 2, 2, 2. Pluto comes in track line division. Okay, process line calculation lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12 setting. Process calculation lines ground centers. Operate the signals operation system. XT1000 comes into 4 panels and rotation surface. Applied to division locations 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, and 3 set correlation setting travel. Direct signals into docking 1, docking 2, docking 3, and line rotation surface and a 45 split lines anomaly back in time. Travel point lines of graph and communication setting. 3 core centers, cross-line signals, and platform communications. Process line direct signals into DF lines of 1, 2, and 3 platforms communication. Direct signals into process calculation ground centers at surface, done by equation. Okay, this is all through a map. Through 24, 40, and 72. Okay? Track division. Now let's get in calculation modification lines of data screens. The data screen lines are plasma screens. This is the plasma using wall. Track lines open signals into modification screen line. Direct signals, portal lines, and position of stargates. Travel point lines of graph communication and mapping sequence of pi generation screen lines of adaptation. Process lines in Earth line 1, Earth line 2, Earth line 6, Earth line 8, and Earth line 12 and track location in Earth. Travel point lines of graph, center core system at XT1000. Platitude lines into the sun, routes, and routers. Correlates the settings out through equation line, calculation line, direct signals in a half pipe. Sets communication lines of barometers, thermometers, and track location lines over cross-line signals and line position locations Earth, and a continuous force line screen adaptation lines of center communication, done by equation. Okay, very powerful stuff. Okay, Earth and habitation zones. Let's go into in and out and audio. In line, send in highest center lines of audio line rotations of outline rotation surface, outer line wind, outer line screen, and outer line surface and traction. Direct signals, modification lines 1, 2, 3, 6 lines of 8 line rotation. Triangulate line rotations to ground centers. Let's go through cross locations of crop circles. Directing symbolism here, and track locations of flux. Calculate modify XT1001, XT1003, XT1006, and XT1012 and track location. Direct signals, modification of cross line signals in X line 1. Position lines of X line 2, X line 4, X line 6, and travel. Data formation line screen lines, inhibitors over screen, perceptions over screen, correlation lines of screen lines, adaptation lines of surface track location line connection setting. Process lines of 1 in position of 2, center lines of core track interference of direction, done by equation. All right, lacing lines of communication lines of travel as lines of T reception lines of box frames. Calculation line highest interference puts all communications centered to center frame. So let's go through 21 volume, 6 over pi, and we'll get into 24 line cycle in position locations. Wait until we get to 10. 10 locates the center, 1 center, and 0 gravity in its calculation. 6 over 1, 6 over 2, 6 over 3, and travel. Direct signals into solar sail, 24 line cycles in track location, done by equation. All right? Disappeared so fast you didn't see it. Okay? Amazing line signals, line conditions setting at 2 over lines, 2 over pi, and line conditions setting. Platforms communicates lines of 3 cycles into line position of 4 cycles, lines of 2, in position of 4 setting equals lines of high correlation track lines. 1 arrow indicates lines, cross line symbol, cross line symbol, cross line division, cross line symbol, cross line division, location setting northwest, south, and east. Process calculation of ground centers, 4 over lines at highest interference, puts 8 lines of traction into direction. Directing signal lines to calculate lines, 4 times 2 is 8 lines of traction. 8 lines infinity rotates the routers and line rotation surface and track location, done by equation. Okay. So this is where you come into the multiple level screens and direct signals into modification lines. But it's amazing when you come to all calculate modify how to really understand the towers of communication system when it comes to all calculate modify and all track locations and track locations of Asgard. But what goes on in platforms through the towers of communication. All right, it's directing signals into modification line screen, adaptation lines of surface, and track location. Directing lines of box, adding frame lines of 1, adding frame lines of 2, process lines, coordinate interference, 1x1000 platitude, cross line signals, cross line symbols, line rotates the system, and travel calculation. Okay, to ground centers, right? Process lines of 3 tractions. Directing signals and line condition setting, process lines of 4 track location line condition setting to a pyramid in traction. Very powerful stuff, guys. Okay, that's what you're getting directions of and setting. How to set up lines of formula, equation lines of height, center interference, and aerodynamic line position location, hieroglyphic, coordinate track adherence, hieroglyphic communications, kaleidoscope, lidofoam, line condition setting, high track location, and hypertones, direct lines and modification lines of high center interference, interstellar line communication and mode screens, high center interference screens, direct lines and modification lines of quadrant line communication screens, communication and plasma screen lines of walls, 4 to 2 line screen lines and data formation lines, and 1 set correlation setting and travel. Points lines of setting, perceptions over screen. Cross lines of high center from perspective. Direct signals into 1 platform, 2 platforms, and 3 core centers out through equation interactions. Another half pipe that lines the signals, the routes, the routers, and line rotation surface and track location. Done by equation. All right. Setting line connection setting to a colossal is line connection setting to the north line, east line, west, and south hemispheres. Track division lines of constellation lines of path, cloud line screen. Mapping sequence lines of 1, mapping sequence lines of 2, mapping sequence lines of 3, cloud lines of high center interference, center core system, into line signals and track locations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 communication lines of clouds, right? Directing lines of 1 into 2, into 3, into 4, into 5 track location, right? Directing signals, lines of data formation lines comes out in signals into 1, 2, 3, and 6, and 8 in platform and number. Travel point lines of graph in position locations is 2, 3 lines, 6 lines of communication lines and number. Travel point lines of graph and cloud lines, communication lines over cross line, communication lines, high center interference, a human red communication and ground center interference, a travel positional point line location and number. Direct signals and modification lines of 3 track location lines, a high crop circle location line, communication lines and number. Track communication line, high direct signals, modification lines of plasma screen line communication lines of 4 line signal, the 5 core center travel communication with mapping sequence by number. Directing signals, data formation lines of 1, platforms of 2, platforms of 3, platforms of 5, and track location. Direct signals, symbol lines of 1, sun and the moon, comes in, track location lines of provisional location waiting on signal. Process calculation of ground centers, line conditions, open signals, open modified line rotation surface, and track location of 0 gravity, done by equation. Mapping sequence lines of coordinates is understanding the location setting when you come into the synchronized track locations. We got a location grid, 3 panels and traction, all right? Direct signals, right? Setting core track and location XT1000, platform 1, platform 2, platform 3, line connected to docking. Waiting on symbolism, line calculation, setting process lines of platform 1, platform 2, and platform 3, and track location, right? Docking 1, docking 2, docking 3, and travel. That's all it is, right? So once you dock the system, the XT1000 expands the main line screen to your grounds, your powers, and your atmospheres, and your highways and traction. Makes it bigger. Process over cross line signals and line position locations comes in 1 tubing system and position lines of a torque field that puts all process communications centers to travel. Directed signals, modification lines over cross line signals into 3 lines of communication barometer, line screen lines adaptation system, energetic dome screen that opens all communications setting and travel communications. That my question. All right. So now you understand when it comes into the XT1000 why they're very important to your system. All through distributors, lines of pi, and carding system and travel in correlation setting and travel communications. That my question. Directing lines and mapping lines of coordinates is all about understanding the position of point centers of charterways. 3 lines of communication lines and a 4-line rotation surface and tractions, right? Direct signals, data formation lines of 1, docking centers line, and line rotations at 3 track location. Calculate modify and position open sequence, open panel, closing signal, line condition setting, confirmation line, screen lines adaptation. Process lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 set core centers. Travel point lines of graph XT1000 platform. Direct signals XT2000 platform. Correlation high interference XT30000 platform and traction. Direct signals, modification lines of 1, 2, and 3 platforms of communications, cross line signals into over cross lines of 1, process lines and projection, and line conditions setting and process calculation of direction. Directing signals and symbolism, process lines and confirmation setting, confirmation communication lines, 0 gravity, 0 correlation, 0 traction, 0 division, and location setting, energetic grid. Confirmation cycle and generation. All through a mapping sequence, guys. Getting communication lines in your alphabetical line setting, you process your communications how you use your metric meters and scales and balance. Understand the 24-line cycle, set position lines as 6 lines of communications, and let's get into 30-line million. Let's get a 30 lines into million line screens, modification lines of 3 lines of calculation. Direct lines of mine into all levels of metric and meters and track location, right? Center core system at 3 settings. Operate the system, operate the setting, operate the lines of 30 million line rotation surface and track location lines of skits, lines anomaly, and center communications setting of travel. Points lines of system, travel point lines of bolding and rotation surface and traction. Directing lines of calculation line is an open signal that opens all panels and rotates lines of surface. Retriangulate line position of its program. Let's go through down cross the line calculation setting of charter communications. Arrow indicate lines of 1, bolding lines of 2, bolding lines of 3, bolding lines of 4, and track location. Direct lines of symbolism, process lines of 0, and gravity line position of power. Direct signals over power over correlation. Track calculation lines of platforms, line signals, and cross line skipping lines of anomaly. Directing signals and platforms 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location into a full pipe and rotation surface and part of an acceleration and time sequence. That my equation. The automatic line screen has an automatic surface that has a 2-line traction and division, cross-line signals, and location setting to an XC1000 adds the platform communication lines and set coordinate center travel. That my equation, right? Very powerful stuff. This is all through maps, guys. That's all it is. That's how you get in position of one travel in one position location to a system, all through calculations. Through a map. The mapping sequence coordinate your system that comes into your planets. Now let's synchronize the planets. Set position of 1, cross lines in position of 3, and of course center calculation. 3 mapping sequence of 3 planets, right? Process lines of Saturn, process lines of Pluto, and process lines of Jupiter. Okay, 3 lines of communication, right? Synchronize location grid this way in travel and a 3-line split lines of communication. Process line platforms 1, 2, and 3, and 4 settings of travel bridging. Direct signals, modification lines of 1 symbolism, 1 rotation, change the communication lines of travel. Direct signals and process line calculation lines change the open sequence locations lines of travel. Direct signals, modification line signals, and 3-line communication high center that change the open sequence line communication lines of high center interference location of travel. Okay, very powerful stuff. All through location grid and line signals in platforms of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 set correlations. Travel point lines of XC1000 platform 1, docking 2, docking 3, docking 4, and docking 5 in travel. Directing signalism, line conditions setting, cross line conditions setting, capsules, line direct signals, and 3 modification lines of screen line adaptations that crosses communication line center and open sequence line communication with capsule that modifies the core track interference of center line communication system through space arc and travel in point lines of graph communication done by equation. Very powerful stuff when you get to higher communications, all through tractions. All right. So getting into line signaling is really understanding the adaptation lines of surface into your graph calculation, screen lines, and high position or formulas through equation, right? All through travel. Directing communication lines of screen lines opens all signals. Now that position your systems puts all lines of ground lines how to use your data information lines of grounds. Let's get into 24-line cycle. 1 cycle lines in position of graph communication lines of 0 gravity into ozone lines as high center interference into ozone line communication lines of 1 graph. Communicate lines of high center interference at 1 surface and locations of biosphere and line position of travel. Okay, so that directs line size center interference that takes the 2 all over travels, 1, 2 lines of 4 panels, and position lines of set coordinate center travel. Directing lines of data, process lines of files, and open sequence lines of communication. Communicate lines of XC1000 lines of platforms, overline cross line signals, 1 position up and 1 position down. Cross lines north of lines of east, cross lines calculation lines of north, lines of west, process lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 line communication. Directing signals into pi and generation, communicate the ground centers, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 center calculation lines of a black hole that changes all communication lines of travels and track location. There you go. See? Isn't that amazing when you see these things in track location lines at all levels? It looks like a donut. Yeah. Spherical sphere of Coliseum line rotation surface of traction. Directing lines of primer circuits is all levels of data formation lines of screen. Now the plasma screen lines of adaptation lines of surface re-angle lines of position location setting. Psychological reset position of arrows. Calculating lines, cross lines, and high center interference. Inline, outline, right? in line. This is where it comes in the clocking system. This comes from all line calculation lines that outline, right? Clocking system, center course system and travel, and Fibonacci line screens, adaptations of center calculation. All right. Center communication lines of ground center interference in position of 1, in position of 2, and track location, right? Directing symbolism line cross line signals in one center, one surface, one traction, one division. There it is, 60,000. Boom. Wow. Exciting stuff, isn't it? Second communication cross line signal over cross lines, downshift line position location over settings into another 60,000 going in the opposite direction in high correlation. Second communication lines, highest interference, one center, one surface, one traction, one division, one calculation line, energetic line screen adaptation. Process calculation on the ground center high interference over all signals over the line position location of pi generates upline signals, upline cross line communication with system all through travel. Woo! Look at them traveling. All right. The higher you go, the more you get modified in line condition setting to 60,000 position because they work for you in all travel. All right. But they have a center core system of their own formula that sets communication with system and travel all through a torical field and track location. All right. Division line screens. Let's go through dividers, lines of cell lines, their location, setting, inhibitors over line and infusion, direct signals and line signals. 3 indicate lines of wires and track calculation lines. Indicate lines of point lines of graphs, and 3 track location, right? Directing symbolism, cross-line signals, cross-line signals, cross-line signals, and open sequence. 3 patterns, line rotations, and dockings 1, 2, and 6, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, and 36 in travel. Directing signals, modification lines, docking center 1, docking center 2, docking center 3, hanger lines of 4, echo chamber, foxtrot, line position of Zuller, and track location. All right. Directing symbolism, line cross-line signals over cross-line centers of 1, platforms of 2, and line position location over cross lines of platform of 6, platforms of 8, platforms of 9, and platforms in travel and 2-point graph communication. Very complicated stuff. Now, if you look really, really close in that communication to a system, you can line calculation setting. You can see a communication to a system. Look what you see. What is coming out through line connections? A whale. You see the whale? The eye line screens. There's the tail. Water containment screen right here and travel. There it is. Graph communication screen lines adaptation. Hooah! Look at that. Coming out of the water. Woo! Ha-ha! Confirmation. Wow! All right. Symbolism line, directing signals and modification centers, opens all track location your system and travel. Getting point lines of graph, center communicate to a system. All levels of travel calculate lines. Let's get into window frames. In signified line can set into 2 panels. Signal lines of line, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. 1 panel communication, right? See that? Now, if I do this, you can see the bounce. See? See what I just did? See what I did? There's the bounce. See? You see it? See how it connects to the panel, the window sill? The connection to the window, guys. Look how it bounces out. Right? So that equal lines of course interference, it sets lines of highest interference and direct signal modification lines of a black hole and track line communicates to a system. All through calculations. Right? It's amazing, right? Did you see that? Did you see it get bigger? Did you see this get bigger? See? Do you see how it moved? This moved this and this moved this. This created the black hole. It's bigger. It's bigger. It's wider. Woo! So you have to go keep going back. And every time I do it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But see how it angles up and position lines of travel? Everything has an indication of line signal and a data formation lines of grounding in all communications, in all process calculations, in all direct signals, right? Over cross-line symbol, cross-line conditions the earth and rotation surface and tractions. Okay? Now it's coming up closer. See? Overline screen. See? Overline screen. Right? Over inhibitors, lines of screen, let's add line circles. Setting line position location 2 atoms in 2 tunnels in the line rotation surface and track location. Where we are in line rotation, let's go see line position location to its window. Where's the line position? Right there in track location. Right? See the symbolism line? See the light tractions open up all line division? See the illumination graph open all track line position to its calculation? All through modify, line track location of your system and your realities. Hooah! All right, so directing signals and line communication to have its program puts all communication in its mapping sequence, laying direct signals into center core system, platform 1, 2, 6, 8, and 12 settings. Okay. Process lines, data formation lines of 3 platforms and tractions, direct lines over cross line signals, and platforms of communication. Okay. Cross line symbols, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 track division in location system and calculations. All right. Now, if you look really close, you can actually see it from here. Okay. Everything I do here shows here. All right. Look at it really close, and you can see it illuminate. See how it's coming in form? See the ground centers lines of 1. Open signal lines, ground centers, human resonance, graph communication lines, screen adaptation lines, high core track interference, energetic location lines across reference and signals, and platform communication setting and travel communication. Look at it again, you'll see that. Right? Don't look at this, look at that. Okay? Very powerful stuff, isn't it? See? You can see it when you illuminate the graph line that crosses symbol. Directing lines and lines of high center interference is a laser track calculates lines high center position of operation to its calculation system. Mystical cortex, directing signals, line condition setting, opens all signals, all modify line condition setting Fibonacci. Directing signals, cross line signals, process lines on a 4-track divisions and center core system and end center line calculation. Directing calculation lines across line calculation setting. Okay. The I central system opens up an all track location to a system. All right. Directing symbolism, platforms of 1, platforms of 3 in track location. Platforms of 6, platforms of 8 in track location. Crossing lines, X line, screen lines, and star lines, and mechanism line position location over power. Directing signal lines and half pipe, line position half pipe in track location. Directing settings lines of center line, communication lines and ground center interference, power generation lines and screen lines adaptations, process calculation, magnetic highway information line cycles in track location. All through calculation modified through data. All right. But look how powerful things can get once you understand how to the lines that communicates in system without even thinking. It's all levels of imagination coming through all modified screen lines adaptations of water inner line rotation cycles of an underwater city that opens all communications. How you see it connecting a high core track interference into a whale jumping out of its system. Okay, look at that. Isn't that wild? Doesn't that just blow your mind? Right? Without even thinking. Now it's all process that form these equations. Getting in signature screen, the coding system is all levels of its image. And once you reach those process line calculations setting, the only thing you have to use in track application is how to use your imagination. Use your imagination. You can get in position lines of picture frames and calculation screen lines adaptation to a whale. Okay. Have fun with it, guys. That's all it is. Just have fun. But I really want you to get into modification centers and really understand how to direct and redirect your system location to your system when you come into pi generation lines and screen lines. It all processes your communication setting and all else how you use your own formula of your own equations and set calculation. All through attraction. Okay? We're done. All right? Just take a look at it, how powerful it is. Try to understand what it is. Try to understand its meaning. Okay. Once you understand that position location, it's all drawn through your system of your imagination. The thoughts, guys, is a line steering line, how to use line communicating and high center interference of its image. The process, your communication setting, how you open up your window frames and track calculate the line system. So line communication setting, your quad and line correlation center travels. Your communication setting to your thoughts, your actions, your emotions are creating a binary, right? But you have to get out of your thoughts, your actions, and emotions, or you can be locked in signal through programming. You don't want to be in a computer framing and direct signal like this and be tethered in line screen adaptation to your earth. You don't want that because the process communication lines is just going to go forward and track location to the system over cross line signals, puts lines of dimension line scales over cross communication lines of your earth and line rotation system of infusion. Okay. So it's important you understand to basically understand more modification to use your image line without even thinking of anything in travels. Getting direct signals and modification lines of surface and track location. See you later.